Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bolivia Political Crossroads. Today is Saturday, July 31st, and this would be number 65, episode 65. Wow. Hi, Ernesto.
Hi, how are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing good. I'm a little tired, but I'm here. It's earlier for me. I'm at a disadvantage.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We have what? 3 hour difference, right?
2 hours. 2 hours. 2 hours right now. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning now. I've been up since 6:30. But that's all right. That's not too bad. That's normal if it's a weekday, right?
Good. Yeah.
How are you doing?
Still with cold weather.
It's cold. Yeah. I keep hearing that. It's the winter time. So we can just get right into this. For those of you that maybe have been disconnected or not following things too closely, kind of one of the big topics within this past week has been the election fraud case from 2019 and everything that went along with that has kind of been shelved, or there might be, I guess, closed. I don't know if there's a better legal term for it, based on a report or an investigation or analysis that was done by two, I don't know, you call them like technicians or analysts, I guess you could say, from the University of Salamanca.
What is the word in English for perito? Because there has to be that.
Yeah.
In trials, there's always the witnesses and the peritos. The peritos are the experts that give an opinion on something. And I can't think of the word either. Yeah. Maybe experts is the word.
Expert witness.
Okay.
That could be it, maybe.
The only thing is that witnesses are people that usually have seen or heard about the crime. Peritos.
Yes. No, they don't have to. They're. I guess you could say they're consultants, right?
Yeah.
Expert consultants, you could say.
Perito, in terms of language, means expert at something.
Mm-hmm.
Perito is an expert that has a lot of expertise on something. Yeah.
So the interesting thing here is that, I mean, these two guys that did this are first of all, they only looked at the how do you say informatica?
The computer.
Yeah, the data, whatever the databases, and I guess you could say that the cybernetic. I guess that's the best word to use. The cybernetic side of the issue. Okay.
Right.
And so, based on the report, they could not find anything that, the OAS report was claiming that, there was this hidden server that was unauthorized and there was evidence of data manipulation without specifying what that data manipulation was. And according to these guys, there was nothing there.
I have the word in English.
Go for it.
I have a dictionary, which is a bilingual dictionary of legal terms.
Awesome.
Yeah, it says peritaje is expert testimony or appraisal.
That's it. Expert testimony. Yes.
Expert testimony. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, you were right. Yep. Pretty good.
So, and if we recall, the OAS report, it didn't just take into account the cybernetic side of the issue, but also the actas, or the vote tally sheets from each voting table that had been altered or didn't match up with what was sent through the system. Again, they'd take pictures of these reports and then send them to a server, and then they didn't match up with what was sent to the server. Just the aspect, and this was very good on the OAS's part, of mentioning the unlevel playing field that the candidates that were up against Evo Morales were subject to. The chain of custody for taking the actual ballot boxes back to the counting facilities. So the OAS report had like 35 or somewhere between 35 and 40 different experts delegated to this task to come up with the report that they did. Whereas the current administration hired these two guys from some university in Spain to do an analysis of a cyber analysis, I suppose you could say, to base the decision on and say, case closed, we're done with this. So, and they're trying again to spin it in the sense that, oh, this is what, look at this, this goes against everything that you've been told up until now by the liars on the right and the derechistas and blah, 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 and the golpistas, the people that were carrying out the supposed coup. But it's really, my personal opinion is that it just doesn't, obviously it's convenient to the government to do this, but it doesn't, it's certainly just it's you'd think they could have done better, But so do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Trying to disregard all the claims against Evo in the election fraud case of 2019. How do you feel about that?
Okay. First, I don't know how this is understood in public, like in the United States, but the University of Salamanca, this is the jovial part of it, the funny part of it. University of Salamanca in Latin America is the Harvard for the Anglo world, traditionally.
Got it.
Salamanca it's like the prestige in educational terms in universities throughout centuries, not recently. In fact, it was more famous in previous centuries than now. Because now there's a lot of universities and people are acquainted with universities outside of Spain and so on. But Spain, Salamanca was that. It's a big symbol for the Spanish world. There's a saying that says, "Lo que Salamanca non dà, la natura non presta." It's in Latin. It says Salamanca cannot give you if nature hasn't given it to you. Basically, but it's Salamanca. The word is there, right? And well, it's so funny because now the memes here in Bolivia are full of Salamanca. It's all of a sudden you always see it, Salamanca being mentioned as something very, very ridiculous, and it was really bad for the university, whatever happened here. But they haven't made any clarification, which I think is pretty bad because they're losing in public relations. This was not a report by Salamanca. Let's begin with that.
No, this is very similar to the MIT, the supposed MIT report.
Similar.
It's very similar.
Very similar. Exactly. Yes. This is some fundación, I think, or NGO, which is led by somebody that works in Salamanca, but that's not Salamanca University.
Right.
On the one hand, I have read that, I haven't verified fully, but I have read it somewhere in the net today. But this guy, the main guy, is from Podemos, for example. The member of, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has to. That's the only thing that would explain it, because even if the guy would work in Salamanca, it's very hard for a professor to do something like that, because man, you're a professor. You have a whole history behind you. But then again, if you're a professor and you're enlisted in the political party in Podemos, then yeah, your word becomes more doubtful, especially in political issues like this one. Okay, so that's as far as Salamanca. As far as the report, you're right. The report narrows the focus when you compare it with the OAS report. The OAS report is more whole, the whole picture. It gives you the whole picture of the election, not only the the computerized part of the election. It gives you the political picture, right? Because they involve the falsifications of the
tally sheets,
of the tally sheets and all that stuff, which is you cannot see that in the process in the computerized work.
Right.
That's manual stuff, you know. Okay. Having stated that clearly, which you have, and I think that's very important just to reiterate, you know, the work is a more narrow spectrum.
Yeah.
And if you concentrate so much your work, then you're never going to find anything, because it'll be so narrow that everything will just be fine, because it's so narrow what you're looking at. And if you want to categorize an election as fraudulent, you have to look at the whole thing. And that's terrible. You know, it's like if you're doing an analysis of crime, of somebody killing somebody else, and you have a film, and well, you only look at a part of the film, not the whole thing, you know, because I don't know, you choose to look at some 15 seconds of the film where the person supposedly killed the guy, and you didn't focus on just a moment the guy is stabbing the other guy. Then of course this guy never stabbed him, because we were looking at a different part of the film. We concentrated on the wrong part of the film. You had to look at the other farther on, and you had to look at the guy stabbing the other fellow on the back. That didn't happen, because they concentrated so much on the investigation that whatever they concentrated on was not going to show you any wrongdoing. And that's exactly what happened, you know, because I don't think the guy is lying. I think he just concentrated so narrowly into that the conclusion is there's nothing wrong with this, you know. In fact, what he says from the interviews, that is, I haven't read the report, from the interviews, is he says, well, I even found more errors than the OAS in what I have seen. He says, yeah, but those errors don't mean there has been bad intention, which is called dolo in Spanish. It wasn't done in order to manipulate the result of the election. It was just mishandling of things, you know. Like, for example, and I find that ridiculous, you know, because he even says that he acknowledges that there was an outside server.
Yes.
But he says, okay, that's bad. That's too bad. But it's not proven that with the existence of that outside server, there was manipulation of the process. And that is, I don't know if you recall, but that sounds very familiar to me, because that's exactly what the guy that worked in one of the consulting firms from the Electoral Tribune said. You know, I don't remember his last name, but this is the guy that was first put on the news in Bolivia in 2019. He was from the consultancy enterprise, and from the enterprise that was in charge of.
Are you talking about a guy who actually worked for the OEP, or he was from the company that put in place the software? Right. I remember.
He said, yes, there is a server. He said, but okay, that's bad. Yes, he said, but nothing happened there. It's there. You can't prove that anything wrong has been done, except that it was there, except that they did have access. Okay, the same thing happened here. This is exactly what the Spanish guy says. He says, yes, there was a server. They had access to it, but I cannot prove that there was manipulation there. You know.
Well, okay. This reminds me of a question. It was probably the same guy, and I think it was the interview with Fernando Rincon, maybe. Where he asked. This was the guy who was in charge of basically the company that developed the software that they were using for the electoral process, right? And he asked him. I mean, this guy is. I'm pretty sure he's Bolivian.
No, he's Bolivian. I just can't remember his name. Yeah.
And he asked him. He said, 0 being totally okay and reliable, and 10 being this is awful and we can't trust the results and we can't trust how the process has been carried out based on this, you know, based on everything you've seen, you know, 10 being the worst and 0 being the best. and this is again, and he asked me, he said, how would you grade this? And the guy said, I'd give it a 10. Like the worst, you know. And then Fernando Rincon said something, so you think there was fraud? And he's like, well, I didn't say there was fraud, but the based on the way everything was managed and carried out, there's no way that we can rely on these results. So sounds like a similar answer, right? Or
but that's what's very interesting that you bring this into the discussion, because in order to prove a crime, it's not sufficient to prove that the door was open and anybody can come in and steal. The door can be wide open. So what? You know, you're not going to point your finger on somebody and say, hey, you came in because the door was open and you robbed. That's no conclusion of the crime. You can't go through a process and end up jailing somebody because you believe he came in and robbed because the door was wide open. No, that's not enough. In order to prove a crime, you have to see, or somebody has to see the guy coming in the house and really taking out the TV and stealing it. It's not sufficient to have the door open. So I understand what he said, because 10 in terms of anybody can come in if the door is open. But can you say that somebody came in? No, I can't, because I haven't seen. I have no proof that somebody came in. But anybody can come in.
Yeah.
You know, anybody can come in. That's no question about that. So yeah, it's a problem like that. And that's in terms of crimes. It's very interesting that you bring it up, because it allowed me as a lawyer to show something, you know. Yes, the door may have been open, but that's not enough, you know. And that's what this fellow in Spain is saying. Maybe not as clearly as the Bolivian guy in CNN, but basically that's the same thing he's saying. You know, he's just saying that. You know, he says, yes, there was a server or two servers, but we can't reach the conclusion that it has been manipulated. You know? Yeah, so he's just missing the part that if you have those two servers, anything could have happened. Yeah, he didn't say that, but it's pretty close. Yeah, it's pretty close. Still heavy stuff. But I'm going to add something to that opinion, which I think was very valuable in your commentary. Was undoubtedly very important. And this I mentioned, I think, to you before. And this is something that the Fiscalia is not saying it, because the Fiscalia and the legal organizations in general are pretty bad in public relations, and especially in communications, I think. Yeah. Because most lawyers just think that because the law says that, then forget it. You know, this is what it is, and you have no right for comment or criticism or whatever. You know, this is a legal thing, and you have to abide by it. And they think that because it's like that's the things are, people should understand, and people don't understand because you need to spell it out. You know. Yeah. There's one big issue on this whole. When the legal process starting, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a criminal lawyer. I do business law, as you know. Yeah. But that doesn't mean I don't know criminal law. I do know criminal law. In criminal law, all you have to know is what the crimes are in a country. You'll see if it makes sense or not. One of the prime elements is to find that out. And in Bolivia, there's no such thing as the crime for an electoral fraud. In fact, you won't find the word fraud in the criminal code. Okay. There's no such thing. So when the process started, and I think I commented to you, what are they going to do here? You know, because you can't find somebody guilty of fraud, of electoral fraud. So if you can't do that, what are you going to do? You circumvent. You go around, beat the bush, like they say, basically. You're beating the bushes, you know, because you're not going straight to the fraud thing. You can't go straight to the fraud thing. There is no such thing as electoral fraud. So what they did is that, you know, the whole process was skewed. I don't know if that's exactly the word, but it's beat the bushes, you know. For example, one of the crimes that I know that they have used in order to process the people that they've processed before is influencias, which means influence, illegal influences from authorities. Of course, that is a crime. If I'm a
influence trafficking, yeah, it's called influence trafficking.
Yeah, it's influence trafficking. Yeah, and maybe you can prove that. But that's beating the bush, right? That doesn't prove that there was electoral fraud.
Yeah.
What you'll prove is that somebody influenced in order to make somebody else do something. Yeah. Okay. So that's the type of crimes, and that's good that you translated that crime into English. That's the type of crimes that they've been trying. Not exactly electoral fraud. So it was a hard case in order to reach the end of it and find this guy's culprits guilty of those crimes. Because even if you did, it was not going to be you're guilty of the fraudulent election of 2019. It was not going to come out like that. If it was successful, it was going to come out.
Is there any kind of crime or categorization of like altering public documents or anything like that? Sure,
yeah. That's probably what they were doing, because there were like 5 or 6 crimes in the document, in the suit, and the one that you're mentioning, I'm pretty sure it was mentioned there. Yeah, the influence trafficking was there, and I think that this falsification was there too, because it's an obvious one. Hard to prove, very hard to prove, because whoever falsified the actors, we're talking about the actors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to prove that those actors were falsified to begin with, and second, who falsified those actors? And those were not the guys in the upper echelons, right?
No,
those were the guys in the messes. So you have to
true.
prove that. That's going to be almost mission impossible. And what you're going to prove that the guy, the big authority was digitating all those falsifications? That's hard to prove, So this was a very difficult process to undertake and to prove guilt of these people of all these crimes, which are in some way collateral to what people want to hear. People want to hear that there was fraud in Bolivia.
Yeah, I think they want to. That's an interesting point. People want to hear that. An example, I'm not saying this happened, that, oh, well, this guy in the informatic office or whatever took this data and changed Evo's 100 votes to 10,000 votes, right? I mean, specifically at this moment and in this place, and they haven't done that, and that's,
they haven't done that. No.
And that you're making a really good point. I think that's what people kind of have in their minds, is that
this is what and they're right, because that's what one expects if you're a citizen, right? That's what you would expect, for example, from the outside sources, right?
Do you remember when I don't know if we talked about this or not on the program, but there was supposedly, I don't know if supposedly, I mean, apparently they were there and there's documentation of this team from it was like a Mexican consulting firm that came in, that was in Bolivia at 2 different times and right up to the day of the election. And then October 20th, I think it was, they took off and nobody can find them. Right.
Yes.
And they were working alongside, and I guess there was, I don't know if how this is proven, but with ministers. I want to say one of them was Arce, not Luis Arce, Hector Arce. I could be wrong on that, but I guess the point being is, like, that looks suspicious, and oh, these were the guys that were carrying out this, the what do you call it? The altercation of, or the alteration of the cyber data, I guess you could say. But again, nobody's been able to, talk to any of those people or give any specific point a finger at something specific.
So. And I think that the crime that you pointed out, which is the falsification of documents, is probably the one that could have carried this process better if You could prove that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the proof had to be of many votes, not the falsification of 10 actas.
Or 100.
No. Yeah. You need to prove many votes, right? And I guess this is just a guess, of course, it's speculation, you know. If you have those, what are the two outside sources in informatic terms? The two sources that were able to access the system from outside.
The servers?
Yeah, the servers. If you had the servers, like these people say, you know, so what, you know? In order to prove that there was falsification, falsifying of documents, you would have to prove that that outside server actually changed the numbers. See?
Yeah.
Instead of 100, they were 100,000. And if you can prove that, yes, there would be the crime of falsifying public documents could be attested in that manner, definitely, you know, because, but you would have to prove that, you know, that this server in wherever country it was brought in this 100,000 votes and favored Evo Morales. That was never proven.
No.
And with the collateral, well, those are the collateral crimes. The collateral crimes is falsification, is illegal influences, and so on and so forth. But there was no such thing as fraudulent elections. You know, there's no such crime. It was a tough cookie for a very proficient and transparent legal process, which means fiscales and judges. Even for that, it was difficult because you would have to prove all this, hard proof, you know, that it happened, no speculation, and like we said, 100,000 votes, not 10 votes, you know. So it was hard. It was hard. And the other thing that is interesting, and I'm speaking like a masista, but there's no other, because one has to be sort of impartial in this.
That's right. Fair and balanced.
Yeah. See, the thing is that Evo, whatever happened, whatever could have happened, you know, whatever could have happened in that election, even if there was fraud, the point was that Evo was not going to lose that election, right? If there was no fraud whatsoever, Evo wouldn't have lost the election, right? I think that's a point that is missing here in Bolivia, especially because in Bolivia tend to think that, oh, there was fraud, you know, and Evo would have lost. He wasn't going to lose.
Hold on for just a second there. So what you're saying is that Evo didn't need to mess with votes or commit fraud to have won the election against Carlos Mesa.
See, the point is that I don't know, because he needed some fraud, but not to win. He needed some fraud in order to avoid the second round of the election.
Right.
Okay. But he was still going to win. He was going to come out first in the tally, and by far. What you need in Bolivia,
we needed 10. You need 10%.
10%, yeah, which is a lot. A lot. Yeah. So
you think? I mean, but I think that's the whole point, right? Is that what they wanted? They wanted to avoid the run. Evo wanted to avoid a runoff because in a runoff, I think it's pretty. I would say. I mean, everything's speculative, but if Mesa had picked up all the other votes from who were the other candidates at the time? Oscar Ortiz and I don't know who else. He would have beat Evo in a runoff.
We don't know that.
Well, we don't know that, but
we don't know that, because I would bet that many people that were voting for other candidates, if they would see that the alternative was voting for Carlos Mesa, some people would have changed in favor of Evo. Why not?
You think so?
I don't know, but it's still speculative.
Sure, it is speculative, but I mean, the point being that if Evo wanted to commit fraud in the,
was to assure himself.
I guess based on the, how can I say this? Based on the based on the forecasts, I guess you could say, or on the survey numbers, you know, and all the encuestas.
Right.
It would have been easier if you're going to commit fraud or change vote tallies. It's going to be easy to do it on a smaller scale than on a larger scale.
Sure.
Right. And
that's what they did probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
see, that's exactly. But the point here is that politically, speaking from a very political perspective, a candidate that wins supposedly with 8% of the distance, right, from the second one. That's a big difference, man. And politically, you're not a loser if you beat the second one by 8 points. You're not a loser by any kind, you know.
Yeah. Then
Then you go to a second round. What happened? But even if you lose, then you have a lot of people behind you.
Yeah.
And you're a very important person in that country, and you have a lot of political leverage. So he's no small cat.
No.
But Evo was not in that position. Evo was not in that position. I don't know. Whatever would have happened if he maintained his hands clean, he would have come out pretty good. Evo, you know. I think he made a mistake doing all this stuff because I think there was fraud, but you can't prove that fraud. But whatever, you know, whatever had happened and whatever the outcome of would have happened, he still has so much political importance in Bolivia, which is amazing. And I think the opposition, that's something that the opposition has never been willing to accept, you know, as a political fact. Because when you accept something, then you look for the solution, you know. Like alcoholics, you know, alcoholics have to accept that they have a problem with alcoholism. If they don't, they're just on it. Yeah, this is what's happening in Bolivia, you know, because the political right only has slogans against it, you know, and one of the slogans is very racist, and you know that, right? And that's no legal way to beat somebody politically, because racism is just going to bounce back to you, and that's what's happening in Bolivia. My feeling is that that's why when there was an election again, they won again, because he's big, you know, he's very important, and the right doesn't acknowledge that, and if they don't acknowledge that, they divide. They have, like, I don't know, 10 political parties competing for the same vote, and when they try to narrow it down, they narrow it down to 2. So they're never going to beat him because they're divided, and they're divided because they think they can beat him, and that's so far to happen. You know, the year that Janine Áñez was in the presidency could have been better utilized from the perspective of the opposition, because what happened throughout that year is that they never thought how big Evo Morales was. They were convinced that because they said that he committed fraud. They were convinced that because they say that he had sexual relations with girls under 18. They were convinced because they hated him so much, he was not going to come back. Come on, you know, all the polls from the beginning of the political process of 2019 until the end of the process, which was at the end of 2020, showed that Evo Morales was first in the polls, and he's still first in the polls. And that's something that the political right is not accepting, and they're alcoholics. They can't beat it. Yep.
It's a good way to look at it.
Politics is so tough, you know. The trip of Evo to Peru is pretty much a proof of that. You know, he's a political figure in this part of the world.
Yeah,
he gets to Lima, and he's the center of the attention, not the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales. You know, yeah, the king sits to his right. Who sits to his left? Evo Morales, to President Castillo's left. You know, and he's not a president. He's not a king. He's nothing. He's just a citizen. Yeah. But politically, he's not just a citizen. You know, that's the whole point here. You know,
yeah,
that's
but
the whole point.
Before we go into that, a couple of things to close on this point. So what you're saying about Evo, here's the thing. He still had higher numbers, right? He was still the first place candidate. And whether he would have won in the runoff is all we can do is speculate, okay?
Right.
Whether he would have gotten 10% or the 10% spread or not, without other things going on that we will probably never know about. Again, that's also, we just don't know. But what I do want to point out here is that his popularity was waning. It was he won with 60 or 64%, then 56%. So those numbers are close. They're not
he
exact,
started
but
with 53, and then he climbed
50, and then it went up to 60.
Yeah,
maybe it was 64.
63, and then he came back again.
Then went back to like 56. Okay, so there are 3 elections, right, that he won outright in the first round.
Right.
And in this 4th one, that's a huge. I mean, that for him, that's not good. He plummeted, you know, and I think there was discontent within his within his own party, and that's the only way to explain it. I don't know. It's not the only way to explain it. There are people from within the party, or the people who weren't Masistas but voted for him because they don't want to vote for somebody else, whatever. But I think that was very clear in the 2019 election, you know, and you still see now, even with after everything that's happened, and there's people, and this is something we didn't touch on that I think is important, is there's this whole kind of topic of, oh, well, if the fraud never happened, then Evo should be reinstated, right? And so even in the MAS, people are saying, no, that's not a good idea, right? Evo shouldn't come back. Whether they're going to be honest and say he shouldn't come back because he fucked up bad, you know, running for a 1st term he shouldn't have run for, and which I think honestly is a large part of that drop from 56% or whatever it was down to 45% is attributable to that in itself, that he became too authoritarian. Sorry. It's a hard word for some reason. Even among his own supporters or party members. And it just looks bad. It's a tough position to be in politically, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing that even within the party, and that, no, you know, if there was no fraud, but they're saying, let's let bygones be bygones and leave it at where it is. But at the same time, you see that, and I think unquestionably, this whole closing of the case of the supposed electoral fraud case is going to be used as ammunition or an excuse to go after the coup leaders, right? And to strengthen that momentum that, you know, they're still calling in military figures and people that were involved in this whole situation and putting them in jail. And so this only strengthens that momentum. That's what I'm getting at here.
Right.
Which I don't think is a good thing.
No, because authoritarianism is strengthening, right?
Yeah.
The process of authoritarianism becomes stronger and stronger every day, which is exactly what has happened. If a government anywhere in the world is able to jail, I don't know, 19 or whatever, 15 members of the armed forces, that's pretty bad, because that's strength. You know, that is big political strength. I don't know how else to put it, but I think that's pretty clear anywhere in the world, because the armed forces in any country are a strength by itself. It's an institution which is very strong in the United States, in China, in France, wherever. If you're able to lock in jail 15 of those guys, or the higher echelons, because these are not soldiers, right? These are guys from,
yeah, these are commanders. And, yeah.
Yeah. If you can nail them and jail them, Jesus Christ, you know, you are a strong political factor in your country. You can do that because you can just do that. The message to the political spectrum is very clear. Nobody can mess here with the government, because if this generals cannot mess with the government, much less can do any civilian here.
Yeah.
So this is terrible. And what you're saying, and I think that's the most valuable part of, in my opinion, at least, what you're opening the door to an analysis that's probably the most valuable, you know. And where are we heading, you know? I don't see anything clearer than we are heading towards a very authoritarian situation, you know. And I don't think that the supplantation, the changing of Arce to Evo, that's just stupid, you know. I don't think even Evo wants that. I think he would be against it, because yes, does he need to be the president of Bolivia to lead Bolivia?
That's no, I think he's figured out by now that he doesn't.
No, of course he doesn't, you know. That's just a formality, you know. And for him, it's most comfortable to lead a country without the formality. Why? Because there's no responsibility in it.
There's less scrutiny, because he's not a public figure.
You're not signing decrees, you're not signing laws, you're not ordering people to do something. You just tell the president, you know, do this, do that, and the president does it for you. So people like this in the world, in the latter, I don't know, 50 years there have been many of these guys, you know. One of them, I think we mentioned it before, was in Panama, right? The guy that is in
Noriega. He's
Noriega,
dead now.
Yeah.
Well, he was dead. Yeah, but he was military, but
yeah, but he was not president.
He was in the government payroll, I guess you could say.
He was never president. Yet he was the leader, and there were presidents being elected, and he would tell them what to do. That's what the U.S. went after him, not after the elected president, because they knew that this guy was the guy who was leading the whole orchestra there.
Yeah.
So that's one example, you know, and there are a few of those in the world. I don't recall her name, but this also happened in oh man, I forget the name of the country in Asia where the woman that has been given the prize of the Nobel Peace Prize.
Is it Myanmar?
Yeah, in Myanmar, yeah. Same thing, you know. There were periods of time in which she led the country without needing to be the president of the country, because she's a big political figure, you know. Big political figures can do that, you know, because they're so influencing, you know. And this is exactly what happens with Evo at this point, you know. He's not the president formally, but he is the dictator in Bolivia. And does he need to be the president? I don't think he needs to be the president for the time being. If you look in political terms, this is the best world for him, because from now until 2025, he can be the authoritarian leader of the process without being president. In 2025, he can become president legally and lead for another 5 years without having been president during these 5 previous years. So that wouldn't even be called a re-election. It can't be called a re-election. So if you make the political evaluation of the process, I think that he's in a very comfortable position. He can just stay like the leader right now, and then participate in the next election and win them if he still has the political power. And I don't see any clouds that are going to impede that if things stay the same, because in the political opposition, we don't have anything that can make the country change its gear. They're making mistakes, as they always make, but what they know, and this is a hypothesis that has become a thesis in Cuba: if you have the political power and you grab the armed forces, and if you grab the judiciary, nobody can do anything against that.
Yeah.
This is exactly what's happening in Bolivia now. Because once you have those two powers, you're unstoppable. because people cannot organize themselves. Look at what happened in Cuba. You know, people go out to the streets. That's it. You know, 1-2 days, and that's it. After that, the police go out. They follow them. They start processes against the leaders, and nobody else comes out to the street because you can't do that. You cannot build political momentum against the regime. That's a tragic situation in Cuba, and I think that in Bolivia, if nothing important happens, it can go that way very easily, because the opposition has been totally erased from the political spectrum here.
Yeah, and like you said, the time to take advantage of the situation was during the interim government, and that was a disaster.
Yep. That was
oh well. Oh well.
Yep.
So you were leading into this topic of Castillo in Peru being sworn in.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to touch on. You know, in a regional sense. Well, Evo was there. I don't know. You know, in terms of Latin America, the heads of state that were invited, Luis Arce was invited and he was there. But I don't know how many Latin American countries had an invitation extended to a president, and besides the president, somebody else tagged along, as is the case with Evo, right? So, what can you say about that? Besides the observation that it shows what an important figure he is, Evo Morales is politically in the region, right? I'll put up this picture. Did you see the picture here? Put it up.
Yeah, it's good that you put it, because it's a fantastic picture. Yes.
Hold on here. Here we go. No, that's not the one I wanted. There it is. Oh, this doesn't seem to be an official, you know, like the photographer for whatever the Peruvian executive, or I mean, it's not the best picture, but here we've got. Can you see this?
Yeah, I can see that.
So there you've got various heads of state. There's what's his name from Chile?
Yeah, he was there for certain.
Here's Evo over here, and there's Arce, and I don't know who else is there, but anyway. So yeah, he was there. They wore almost the same jacket, which I think is a protocol wise, you know. Whatever. It's like wearing, you know, when you have the Grammy or the Emmy awards in 2 acts.
I think the Argentinian president was there too.
Fernandez?
Yeah. He was supposed to be there. At least that was the plan. Yeah,
like I said, this picture here, I don't think this was like the official press, you know, this, I don't know who took this picture, honestly. I found this, well, I found it on Facebook. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, it's favorable to able to have Castillo in there. As we've mentioned before, they're definitely more politically aligned in next door neighbors, and it also shows you, you know, Abel is no, he's not a government authority in any sense at this point. And for him to be hanging out there is shows you that not just within Bolivia, but beyond our borders, what a significant figure he is. So, anything you want to add to that?
It's terrible. Yeah, yeah, there were presidents there. We don't exactly know how many, but yeah, the president of Chile was definitely there. The president of Argentina was there too, and the president of Bolivia was there too. So the only guy that was next to him was the guy that was not president, which was Evo. I don't know. This is a strong message. You know, there's a very strong message. Evo is a political figure in the region, and he's a political figure in Bolivia, and growing because the election of Castillo in Peru is because Castillo is also comes from an indigenous origin.
Mhm.
It's a natural alliance between Evo and Castillo, a natural alliance. They're closer than Castillo to Maduro, for example, or Castillo to the
Fernandez.
yeah,
Yeah.
because the racial part is important.
Yeah, the ethnic. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So yeah.
And just to give you some points, I remember this is probably 2 months ago or so, before we knew who was going to be, anything about Castillo. You had mentioned that you suspected Evo was going to take another approach, I guess, at staying relevant, and that approach was going to be on a regional level, which I think is this event and his presence there definitely backs that up. So, good job.
Good job for him. It definitely shows one thing, which is very interesting. He's more seasoned. I think that's the word in English. He's more seasoned than the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's been so long at it. It's like any job in the world. If you do it 1 year, you're 2 years, you're pretty good at it. If you do it 10 years, you're damn good at it. If you do it 15 years, you're awfully an expert. And he's become a leader for so many years in Bolivia and outside of Bolivia, and yeah, he's growing, and he behaves like a real leader outside. He wasn't like that when he just began, if you would recall. His participation in international events was very relevant because he was an indigenous leader. It has always been that way.
Mm-hmm.
But his personal behavior was more of a, I don't know if it's a secondary guy, but not as the man of the picture. He always regarded, or he himself regarded, what's his name, from Chavez, from Venezuela. He regarded Chavez as his teacher or whatever, his inspiration,
his mentor.
And then he was very respectful of Fidel Castro. Well, he had one giant, which was Fidel Castro, no question, because he was too big for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're an indigenous guy, Fidel Castro was too big for the world, so let alone Latin America. No. And then Chavez, by the time Evo became president, was big. He was big internationally because he was also a very mouthful guy. He was big because he was important because of his actions, but because of his mouth, he talked all the time. I was always on the move and always on TV. He was a very a very TV attractive guy, because he was so strident in the things he did.
Charismatic.
And, charismatic and all those qualifications he had. But, now they're gone. And Evo, without being that big mouth, without having the experience of Fidel Castro, is the more seasoned guy on the spectrum right now. And that can show the way he behaves, the body language is so important. I'm not a psychologist, but if we ask a psychologist, it would be interesting to know, because I see his body language is like that. He's sure of himself,
Mm-hmm.
And people act accordingly. They give him all the.
They give him space.
Yeah, they give him the space to do that, and he's becoming the leader of the region. I don't know, the leader of the left, no question about that. What would be interesting, and let's just speculate,
Sure.
If Lula becomes president of Brazil, big question, who's going to be the leader? Lula. Yeah. If he becomes the president of Brazil, what's going to happen in the relationship of the leadership of the left in Latin America? Because Lula is big because of his country, not because of him. Mm-hmm. Brazil is too big,
Yeah.
If Evo competes with that or is above that, then he's got it, because if you lead over Brazil, come on, what's next? That's too big. Yeah, that is too big. But at this point, I have no question. He's the leader of the left, I think. Well, he's competing with Maduro a little bit, but I think Maduro himself recognizes that there's very little he can do. Like it happened to him, to Evo, during decades here in Bolivia,
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to compete on the ethnic grounds in Latin America, because if your opposer is an indigenous guy, there's very little you can do. You know, no matter how good you are at it, you know, because the possibilities of him being politically right are bigger because he's indigenous. There are 500 years of slavery, you know, of which the other guy is guilty of. So it's hard to go against that, you know. Yeah. But that's something that I learned a lot in Fox News, because I listen a lot to Fox News, and they're very good at it. You know, what they say is that the left in the U.S. is, well, what they call the left is the Democratic Party, you know, plays so good at being politically right, you know, that it's so hard for the right to beat that, you know. And I pay a lot of attention to them because they make very good points, you know, and I think that in many of those points they're correct, you know. The way that the left, and I hate to say that because there's no left, you know, the way Democrats in the United States have established what is politically right or politically incorrect is phenomenal, because that's the way in Bolivia Evo does it, you know.
What I think is that's an interesting interesting point that I haven't even thought about, is that and I guess the Democrats kind of betting on minorities is very smart when you look demographically. The demographic shift in the United States, the minorities, you know, whether they're Latinos or African Americans or whatever, are becoming how to say this with white people in general are not going to be the majority at some point. I think we're very close to it now. I don't know, but so if you're trying to capture that voting base, it's a smart move.
That's the way to do it.
because they're becoming more and more, right?
Sure.
I wish I had the numbers, but that's interesting. Whereas in Bolivia, well, I don't know. There's the shift demographically is sort of headed the other way, right? I mean, there's still a very strong, or I don't know if predominant is the word, of an indigenous population, but it's kind of shifting the other way. The mestizos are going up, and the, you know, indigenous it's going this way, right? Indigenous,
the pure blood.
It sounds weird to say it. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable saying pure-blooded indigenous or whatever. But the shift is kind of going the other way. Whereas in the States, you know, all the traditional minorities, I guess you'd say Latinos and African Americans and Native Americans. That's not going to go up, but it's going the other way, right? So anyway, I think it's a good place to sign off for today. And thanks. It's always a pleasure. For me, it's been a pleasure, and I'm glad that things are just rolling in the U.S. because I think they're rolling out pretty good, especially the treatment of the pandemic and the vaccination process. We're still having big hurdles in Bolivia, as you know. Yes. But well, let's hope that's the main point, you know, that people get vaccinated, I think, everywhere in the world. But it's a big discussion. We should leave it for the next time, because it's a big issue everywhere in the world. The obligation to vaccinate is a big question mark in legal terms. Can you obligate people to do something or not, such as vaccinating? But yeah, this is not being the day, but we should probably address it next time. It has been great. I enjoyed it fully, and have a good 2 weeks. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.